Our guest tonight is Owen Jones, the journalist, author of best-selling books such as Chavs, The Demonization of the Working Class, The Establishment, and more recently he's got a YouTube channel with over 700,000 subscribers. So let's talk about Owen Jones. Hi Owen.
Hiya, how you doing, buddy? What's going on?
I'm good, thank you for doing this.
Obviously.
Oh, thank you. I know.
I'm
very proud.
well flattered, even though I'm chaotic.
I know it was quite something to pin you down.
Well, I'm just a mess. Well, no, I can
let's tell the audience, because lots of people depend on you.
They definitely do not.
They depend on you to go on TV and tell the presenters what's what.
Well, I did that, and then I got largely blacklisted from television as a result. You see, that's the problem. You can do that, and then you quickly run out of road.
So no more Good Morning Britain.
Very good point. Used to do that a lot.
Yeah.
As a regular. Then had a big argument with Ed Balls, who is, I think, the smuggiest, most annoying person he's ever.
Yeah.
About Gaza, and that was that. That was that.
Was it? Didn't you have like a little beef with him about like his podcast with George Osborne?
Well, yeah, because what he does, his business partner and friend George Osborne, one of the architects of austerity and the ruin of the country, linked, of course, to thousands of excess deaths. Anyway, he's all buddies with him, and he hates me, and which, you know, I don't say it personally, he just hates the left, but I think that's quite symbolic, isn't it? Because he's like, he sees George Osborne as like legitimate, pally, all the rest of it. But George Osborne specifically raised me. No, Ed Ball started talking about me, and George Osborne's like, "Well, your face goes like thunder when you mention Owen Jones." And it just sums up that kind of centrist, doesn't it? Because they got. I mean, it happens over and again in history, but they think of themselves as centrist, but they define themselves principally against the left. They hate the left with a passion. The right, people who literally wrecked the country, ruined the country, and also caused untold human misery. They're like, let's become business partners.
I mean, like with Ed Balls, right? I think I remember watching that thing on Good Morning Britain, and I do think what it was that you embarrassed him. You like, because he's like not really achieved much. He was a failure. He was like promised all this stuff, and you like just put it out there on TV.
Well, I think possibly because he said to me, well, Owen, actually, if you listen to my podcast, and I said, well, I don't listen to your podcast.
Yeah, that's it.
He didn't like he didn't like that at all. Fine, whatever. Yeah, I mean, he was getting himself. I mean, I look back, what I'd say about that, because that was about Gaza, and he was trying to put me on the defensive. And it was one of the various moral panics about one of the protests, which they were trying to demonize extremist, hateful people and all the rest of it. And it's just like this constant attempt to turn the world upside down, that the people who oppose genocide are hateful extremists, and the people who literally have supported and facilitated one of the worst crimes of age, they're the moderates. And he got that's how he sees the world, because we're illegitimate. We're not legitimate political actors. We're beyond the pale. And he, you know, I guess, you know, the point about that kind of slot on Good Morning Britain, you're doing the headlines, you're put up against the right winger. And I was on that, and they put me on. I got on really well with them, and they put me on. But then, you know, the genocide began October, and I had to talk about what was actually happening.
Yeah.
And it just was exceptionally uncomfortable. And when I tried to make the case against, I don't know, demonizing people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, non-believers, marching in huge numbers to oppose little kids having their schools ripped apart. It was kind of like I'd almost violated, I don't know, broadcasting rules.
Well, yeah, but as well, you probably did violate their fucking rules. But I mean, like, my mum is a steward. She does stewarding on the marches, right? And she loves you. I was telling you, she sent me your newsagents, like,
Oh, you corrected it.
Yeah.
Corrected it. In real life,
well, no,
massive dick.
She was saying that in her like group WhatsApps, they're very appreciative of you going up there, because she says that the difficult thing about like being in this country, kind of fighting for the Palestinian cause, is like the gaslighting and like the thinking that you're being made to think that you're insane. So like what she's been doing with the stewarding is that like at least she's seeing people every Saturday who fucking know what's going on and like are trying to do something.
I think that's it. But I think people feel they are going mad. I feel like I get mad sometimes because it's just I didn't have any illusions about. I've worked in the British media now for 13 years, and 14 years as a columnist.
Yeah.
And somebody goes on TV or whatever. And I never had any illusions in it. I always knew it was rigged in favour of, defenders of the status quo, that it's systemically racist. And I bring up that point because, what I always say about since this began is never stop being shocked and never let it be normalised, because I think there's a tendency of some to go, well, what, in terms of the coverage of what's happened is, what do you expect? What do you expect? But we shouldn't do that. And the point I make about systemic racism is, in my lane as a white guy from Stockport, is there was no pretense that Palestinian life has any meaning.
Yeah.
There's no pretense that, they should have just said, oh, we don't think Palestinian life has even the fraction of the worth of an Israeli life or Western life, because there's no other way you'd be able to justify their reporting of what's happened. But I think it's just people who watch just basically the worst possible depravity imaginable, like, kids being slaughtered in literally, we don't know how many kids have been killed, but butchered in the most sadistic way possible. Huge numbers murdered. Gaza wiped from the face of the earth, different colour and texture when looked at from space. Hospitals destroyed, medics murdered, over 1,000 medics killed. Deliberate starvation, the genocide and rhetoric of Israeli ministers. And you look at all that and you kind of think, well, obviously if you don't oppose this, then what are you going to oppose? But actually opposing that is almost treated as though you're a fringe extremist.
Yeah.
And if you support it with caveats, so you do the hand wringing. Obviously, we regret any civilian loss of life. That's mainstream and respectable if you support it. I think people do feel like they're going mad, and it's exposed. I think a lot of people who did have illusions in our media, I think they've lost them in quite a brutal way.
Yeah, I think the general public, you can see when you're doing coverage on the genocide, when Navarro's doing it, like, their numbers are huge. People are, because you don't get it. Like, I don't really watch TV news, and I watched BBC News at 10 the other day, and it was talking about the ceasefire deal, and it had this 5-minute kind of segment of a family who, like, quite rightly, that shows their pain of, like, their daughter has been held hostage, and, like, what it means to them to have back, and, like, what they've been going through the last year. And then it was like, and a bunch of Palestinians have been released.
Yeah.
And there was no kind of sense of, like, what that family has been through.
Well, exactly. It's interesting because I'm in the middle of a firestorm at the moment about this.
Yeah.
Tell us. I wrote a piece and did a video about Palestinian hostages.
Yeah.
Because, between 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza were occupied, and 2021, 1 million Palestinians were incarcerated by the Israeli state. But what they do is either they do administrative detention, and that is, there's no charge, there's no prosecution, there's no trial. They're just snatched from their homes, including at the dead of night, thrown into detention, not told why they're there, not told when they'll be released, often prevented from seeing their families, having no access to lawyers, hostages. Others, when they are tried, they're put through military courts. The judge and the prosecutor are both serving Israeli soldiers. Is all conducted in Hebrew. The trial lasts minutes. And then they're prosecuted. And then they're put in prison.
So this is before.
This is
just generally how Israel operates.
And Israel is the only country on earth which systematically convicts children through military courts. And after 7th October, that went on steroids. And, I interviewed Gideon Levy, who's a really courageous Israeli journalist. And he said to me, and he said this to me over a year ago, and he's right. He said the conditions of those Palestinian detainees is much worse than those of Israeli hostages. And we know that because they are systematically tortured. Dozens have been tortured to death. And they also are systematically sexually abused and raped. And there are, even now, CNN, New York Times, for months have had to cover the raping of Palestinian detainees, although it's buried. It's not like a big story. And one of them, as an example, is the head of orthopedics at Al-Shifa, one of Gaza's most prestigious doctors, who died in detention. And the other witnesses, detainees, said he was raped by 3 Israeli soldiers using their rifles. And you just look at it and think, if we're talking about, they're hostages, not convicted of anything. They're just held for no reason, tortured and raped. If that was happening in that same way with and I'm not saying the taking of Israeli hostages is a war crime, which I've said from the beginning. That would be used as examples of how evil and depraved these monsters are, but that doesn't happen the other way around because Palestinians aren't really seen as humans, are they? That's the problem.
Yeah, what I want to know is because you've been working in media, right? Like, say because you work for the Guardian. Are you like an employee of the Guardian?
Well, the way it works, I'm a columnist at the Guardian.
Okay.
So I'm self-employed. This confuses people. Most columnists aren't staff. They don't
Okay,
work.
yeah.
I don't work in the building. I'm on a retainer, which means I'm contractually tied to the Guardian. I'm not allowed to write for the newspapers, so I have to write like a column a week.
Yeah. But what happens if you're trying to like write about what you just described and you work for the BBC and you want to put like a story out? Like, is there like a mechanism that like stops that from happening?
What, media organisations?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I just did a big report about BBC where I interviewed lots of journalists, and what they spoke about. I mean, 100 BBC journalists have signed a letter condemning the BBC's coverage, and they condemned it.
But then, what do those journalists do? Like, what are they doing in the work?
If they pitch stories, are often stopped, blocked. I mean, this is all different parts of the BBC. Yeah, they're blocked. Their stories are reframed. You know, it's things like the headlines, awful. I mean,
have you ever had stuff changed that you've like written an article and then they've like took stuff out? Or
well, I can't speak much about my experience at the Guardian, but I've had to always. I have to fight to stand my corner.
Okay.
You know, and I've had to fight to stand my corner. Like the few journalists with a mainstream platform who've spoken out about this. And I'm not trying to give myself a cookie there. That's a damning indictment of the media.
Yeah.
There's very few of us who work for like a newspaper. Who are they?
Yeah.
Me, Nesri Malik. I mean, in terms of like actually, you know, who actually like this is an issue they've stuck to and spoken out about. I think it's me and Nesri.
But
and that's obviously you all, you know, anyone who speaks out about this is put under pressure and has their careers menaced. That's just the inevitable part of what I'm mostly blacklisted from television.
Yeah.
As I said, I don't go on. The only program I regularly go on now is the Jamie Ryan show on radio on Channel 5. I barely go on other TV channels. You know, that's you have to pay that price if you speak out on this and that. But you know, I'm not a Palestinian journalist being blown up with their family. So,
but then what do you know what the readership is compared to like what your YouTube channel is? And like more people getting eyes on your YouTube channel than like a Guardian article.
I think it's something. My YouTube channel is my biggest platform now.
Yeah.
I mean, because also the videos don't just appear in that; they go, it goes on Instagram and on Twitter and but you know what? That's the direction things are moving in.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the Columnist. There's lots of very legitimate critiques of the Columnist, aren't there?
Yeah, like what?
Well, I think, you know, kind of having someone just, you know, put on a pedestal to kind of impart their wisdom on a whole range of different subjects.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people, that winds them up, and I can see why. And a lot of them just receive wisdom anyway.
Yeah.
Or actually whip up quite a lot of bile against quite a lot of vulnerable people who don't have a platform. But I think the reason it's moving towards video because if a columnist is basically like someone who's having a chat with you about their opinions and having a personal relationship with you, that actually makes more sense on the video, doesn't it? So I think newspapers are going to move. I think, you know, in the way that newspapers had to change from print to online, and that was a big shift, which a lot of newspapers were worried about. But actually, the Guardian was ahead of its time. It did actually understand that, and it's got, you know, most people don't read the Guardian in print, but it's got a big global audience. But, you know, it's definitely moving towards videos. Obviously, I've got a big audience with my column, and I'm very grateful for my column, and I've used it over the years to try and, you know, argue for things which I would say a lot of other columnists won't argue for.
Yeah.
But, you know, for me, I think every newspaper has to wake up to understand that if you don't understand that younger people in particular want to get their news and their opinions and columns, all the equivalent or polemics from people they see on video and they feel they have a relationship with, then, you know, you're gonna go the same way as people who bet the house on print, aren't you?
So what do you think is like the usefulness of, like, do you think it's effective having like left-wing media spaces like Novara and yours and like in America like Hassan Piker and stuff like that? Do you think it's actually effective in changing or affecting like politics.
Well, I mean, if you're on the left, if you're a socialist, you think change happens through collective struggle.
Yeah.
If you don't believe it's about individuals, so I think you've always got a.
But then isn't that scary that we're moving into a space where, like, after the election in America, they were like, we need a left-wing Joe Rogan. And they were like looking at Hassan Piker and stuff like that. And you think, aren't we already losing quite badly if we're looking for like an influencer to save us?
I think there's a lot in that, but you've got to play the game, unfortunately, about the
Yeah.
environment you're in. And I think, you know, with the left, we've got to kind of reconcile our values and our worldview with how we actually win people over. And as long as people who are, when you call them a columnist or an influencer, as long as they're not put up as a pedestal as a leader. I don't see myself a leader. I'm not a leader. How am I a leader? I'm not accountable. No one's elected me. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, I can get critiqued and learn from that. And I've learned so much from being criticised. Sometimes, and it's very important that, because when you're in that space, you've got some people just like, and they hate you.
Yeah.
And then you've got other people who are angry with you, but they've got reasons to be angry with you. Like I've had to change the way I look at the world, partly because I didn't understand issues, partly because it wasn't my lane. And
what kind of things have you changed?
Definitely trans rights. I mean, I didn't speak out about trans rights until, you know, I had a position, you know, I first got a column at The Independent in 2012, and the first piece I ever wrote about trans rights was 2015.
Okay.
And, you know, I didn't speak out about that. And I think sometimes as well, I didn't really start what was going on online, but I think I like defended people who were like trans people calling out. And I just thought, why, you know, why are these people being attacked?
Yeah.
And I think I did it. And this is the danger. You get this, this is actually quite interesting. I think, yeah, let's see what you think about this, because it is this phenomenon of, I think if you end up with any sort of position where you're talking about your opinions, you get attacked online.
Yeah.
And then the danger is you can end up feeling very defensive and end up feeling like solidarity with other people in that position.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't do that, because obviously you get some people on the left, we'll talk about this to start recording, you get this phenomenon of the left, people go, well, I used to be as left as they came. You know, I didn't leave the left left me, and all these people online just dogpile me because I didn't, you know, I broke the rules of purity, and, you know, I'm not right on enough for them, and just because I said this, you know, and, you know, and then, you know, you've always had that kind of, you know, I didn't leave the left left me. So on things like trans rights is a really good example. Well, just like intersectionality. I mean,
No,
you know,
back on that, yeah. How do we? Because I think you're right in the sense of like what happens is then people then get more and more reactionary to protect themselves, either they're living or like their like identity or whatever. Like they're getting attacked, they're being called all this and that. How do we then stop people from moving closer to being a reactionary rather than?
It is tricky, that, isn't it? Because you've got a kind of, again, a lot of this is like like working out who's who in that.
Yeah.
Because you got this a lot over the issue of trans rights. You got a lot of people, what you'd get this whole like, you know, women in the 1980s, we were marching gay people, we were and they kept doing we were holding their hands.
Yeah.
They died. And I don't want to be brutal about this. There were some very courageous lesbians who did that.
Yeah.
We're talking a few hundred people here.
Okay.
It's like, somehow you got this idea like, you know, that it wasn't Times columnists doing that. Do you know what I mean? And you get this kind of attempt to like, we were the natural allies. You know, I mean, most women and most men didn't like gay people in the 1980s. That's what the polling in the survey showed. It wasn't, I mean, let's not, you know. But it was almost, what you did get is we were there in, you know, we were fighting for these causes in the, you know, in the 1980s. And people like us were fighting for that. And now you come along, you younger people, just say, we're not progressive enough. How dare you?
Yeah.
But a lot of these people aren't that progressive.
Well, I think like
problems.
things change. You know what I mean? Being progressive in the 50s is different to being progressive in the 80s, 90s.
And they
like,
get
you know
that
what I mean?
because a lot of those, you know, every generation you get people. Look, you got that obviously within feminism, LGBTQ rights, struggles against racism, where you get people who thought, well, they look at earlier, they were often rebelling against some of what came, you know, the kind of like establishment of. I mean, that's what feminism did that all the time, didn't it? It was that constant revolt against earlier waves of feminism.
But I guess what's happened is that for want of like a better phrase, but like cancel culture or something like that has essentially made the other side stronger for two reasons. On the one side, you can only cancel people that care or whose audience cares. Because if you're like a YouTuber, video game YouTuber, and you like say a slur or do something and you try to get cancelled, your audience doesn't give a shit. Whereas if you're kind of like on the liberal left side, you will get cancelled. And then the people who do get cancelled then shift over. So
But I don't know who does. I mean, when we say that, I get that. I mean, look,
I like Russell Brand, for example, right? He, to protect himself, I'm not saying we want him, but to protect himself, he's just gone over to the far right.
But I don't think that's what happened there. I mean, look, I'm not going to get into the head of Russell Brand, but someone did a big detailed studies about Russell Brand, and they noted that the videos he was doing when he was trying to be all kind of what would be seen as lefty or hate, but that kind of terrain, weren't doing well. And then he started doing videos which actually suddenly reached an audience. And he, I think that guy's an opportunity.
He's a narcissist.
He's a narcissist, and I think that's different. And I think, you've always got egomaniacs who want an audience and you want to be liked.
Yeah.
I think, realistically, because obviously we were talking about cancel culture, it is a clip that it's like the people who get, it's the people, I mean, you can see it over Gaza, who's getting hounded.
Yeah.
Who's getting, you don't hear cancel culture very much anymore, by the way. Since all this began, you don't hear about free speech. You don't.
No.
Since 7th October, that's pretty much stopped because a lot of the people who were pushing that are actually the people who are cancelling everyone. But I think you've always got, I think sometimes you just got, to be honest, people saying things and getting criticised by teenagers with blue hair on Twitter.
Yeah, for sure.
And then going, I'm a victim, and becoming victimised by it. And I think a lot of that was, I think some of those people are looking for an excuse because some people, the idea they'll become conservative, you're going to change your whole worldview, your whole view of history, your whole world, looking at the world, because a 19-year-old said you were right-wing on Twitter. Oh, come on.
It's like that. Like, that's what I find crazy. And I wonder about the motivations. Like the American person we were talking about earlier, who is suddenly now like a reactionary for everything, who hates homeless people, who is no longer compassionate towards anyone. And you're just thinking, is this just because you were criticized on one issue that suddenly your whole worldview is just flipped?
But that's the thing,
down?
I don't buy that. Because
so you think it's like a grift? You think they're chasing an audience?
I can't get into the head of people. I just know that, I've been criticised a lot on the. I feel like I've lots of times with the left got angry with me, but I haven't gone right wing,
Yeah.
And sometimes I've been criticised, and I get criticised sometimes, and I feel very defensive about it. I feel that's just not fair, and I think some criticisms go far, but there's definitely I've made mistakes, and I need to be. And I'm not doing this in a kind of Maoist self-criticism, like self-flagellation.
Yeah.
But you should. You need to demarcate between bad faith critics who aren't interested in you evolving at all. They just want you to gone, and people who just genuinely, in good faith, think you fucked up and think you've said something which. What I find, on the issue, trans rights is a really good example. Is just trans people have basically been, such as they were ever there, driven from public spaces and public life altogether. To be a trans person is just to be cancelled every day. You're just screamed at. For existing, you get a trans person appears in an advert or on a TV show in passing, and then they're getting dogpiled on Twitter. It's just and then you get people who say the same opinions as is expressed in every single newspaper and both Labour and the Conservatives, and they're the ones who present themselves as the victims. I mean, are they going to try it now? They literally run the superpower. These people. And you always get, that's the problem is, I mean, oppressors as well always try and present themselves as victims, don't they? That's always been. I mean, you got, feminazis, men calling feminazis, and, straight people going about gay people, they got more rights than you and me these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that sense, there's a cliche, when you're used to oppression, equality feels like, when you're used to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Yeah.
I think there's something in that. I think there's something in people who aren't very progressive who don't like being told that because it's their identity, because they want to see themselves as the good people.
Is that because and we're getting this kind of self-reflection at a minute, is that because you think the left is too lectury, too hectoring? Well, that's what some people are saying now.
I get that. I think there's ways of doing it, isn't it? Because I think it's definitely true that you've got what you've got to do is balance where people are and where you want to get them to without making life harder for minorities who lack representation and for whose life is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
And, what they've done with trans people is, I mean, look, people forget what happened with gay people.
In what sense?
In that, I think people think that was like a linear improvement. It just got better and better and better. And that's just not at all what happened. I mean, You know, you got partial decriminalisation in England and Wales in 1967. After that, more gay people were arrested and locked up.
Mhm.
You got an escalation in the use of indecency laws, for example. I mean, the decriminalisation was 2 consenting men in a house where all the windows were closed,
Mm.
with all the curtains drawn.
Yeah, and I
Um,
was seeing somewhere that you could get arrested for having sex if you had a housemate in the house. It
Yeah.
wasn't called
Yeah.
public.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And then you got a case in the 90s of men who got arrested and prosecuted because they had an orgy.
Yeah.
But
What, in the 90s?
in the 90s.
Fucking
But
hell.
in any case, what happened in the 80s, if you look at the British Social Attitude Survey, 1983, attitudes towards gay people were not good. And throughout the 80s, they got worse and worse and worse and worse because you got obviously HIV/AIDS and you got a moral panic, which was driven by the media. And you got cases of sexual predators who were gay.
Mhm.
By 1987, the British Social Attitude Survey showed catastrophic public attitudes towards gay people, way worse than towards trans people today.
Mm.
Only 10% of people thought same-sex relations were normal. 2/3 said they were not. They were right. It was 2/3, 66% said same-sex relations were always wrong or mostly wrong. And when I say 66%, 50% said they were always wrong and 16% said they were mostly wrong. And Thatcher introduced Section 28, which criminalised the so-called promotion of homosexuality in public bodies. She said at the Tory conference in 1988 that children are being taught they've got an inalienable right to be gay. And even when Labour repealed Section 28 and equalised the age of consent in the early 2000s, look up at the polling. The public were overwhelmingly opposed to that. They were overwhelmingly opposed to getting rid of Section 28. They were overwhelmingly opposed to the equalisation of the age of consent for gay people.
It's kind of crazy, actually, because I think about myself and I'm like, it wasn't like all this thing we're having right now about like, oh, woke's gone too far and all this shit, and you just kind of actually do think it is just a lot easier to be gay now than it was when I was a teenager. It just is, and we're trying to pretend that like woke's achieved nothing and it's been counterproductive to the cause and blah 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 blah.
But people said
but
all the
like,
time, they always said, what every minority plus women, who obviously majority, have always been told in their struggle for rights is you're too aggressive.
yeah.
And that's where feminazis comes from. But that's, that's what they said about us. You should look up, have you watched Milk?
Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you?
It's a classic example of that. I mean, now it just shows it was just, it shows the schism there between Harvey Milk and his crew who thought you've got to go out and fight, and the kind of old gay establishment who were like, we need to just be respectable and have cups of tea and just make people look like we're normal. And if you look back at the way Anita Bryant, who was she was the leader of the anti-gay.
Died recently.
She just died. May she rest in peace. The lesbian granddaughter lives on.
Oh, she got a lesbian granddaughter.
But she was one of the most popular people in the United States. Gallup poll, even in the early 80s, one of the most popular people in the United States. And she famously had a cream pie thrown in her face.
Yeah.
If you look up the way they were, it was like, these are women-hating, aggressive, militant, threatening gay men.
Well, you can even find like articles from like the 80s talking about like, should lesbians go into women's prisons?
Oh no, that was a big thing. Yeah, that's a big thing. People forget about that. Yeah, and it was always portrayed. But what people were always told is, if you were just you're too aggressive, it's counterproductive. But I mean, look, the famous examples are suffragettes, because they literally went around bombing.
Yeah.
They killed people. They trashed things up, but they also killed several people.
Free Luigi.
Well, there you go. Free. Do we get arrested on the anti-terror legislation for that?
Oh, I don't know.
How does it work? But the point is, people are always told throughout history that. So it's not. It would be abnormal. Trans rights movement would be abnormal if it was the one movement that was seen as not aggressive, because they're always portrayed as such. I just think. I think the problem we got, if I'm honest, it's not that. It's not about trans rights. It is about the fact that what's different now, and this is a big difference, is the far right is resurgent and actually very strong and powerful, and it's merged with all these other things, because the anti-gay backlash didn't have that. And
wait, so even you wouldn't say, because Thatcher didn't represent the far right?
She wasn't the far right.
Okay.
Neoliberal. And, she's right-wing, neoliberal. But that was not incipient fascism.
Do you remember any of Thatcher at all?
What, because I'm a geriatric millennial, you mean?
Yeah.
Not really, no. I mean, I do remember asking my parents, because I heard about Thatcher a lot, do you wish Thatcher was dead? And they said, you should never wish anyone's dead.
Oh, really? They thought that?
Which was not an answer to the question.
Your parents were quite militant, right?
Literally.
Yeah.
They were they met.
Militant. Tell us what the militant tendency is.
Militant tendency was it was the most influential Trotskyist group of the 1980s.
Yeah.
And it was organised around a newspaper called Militant. And they used to pretend they weren't a political party, they were just a newspaper. But they had about 8,000 members. And they built themselves up within the Labour Party because their view was that,
like you tried to do.
Exactly, inherited that. But it's like the political wing of the Labour movement, and even if it's run by the right wing, you have to, that's where, because of the union link, that's the political wing of the organised working class. So, and they got at their peak, they had like 3 MPs who managed to get selected.
Who do you know who they were?
Yeah, Dave Nellis, who's still around, Terry Fields, and someone else. But they famously came to dominate Liverpool City Council.
Is this the story of them sending taxis? What was that? Is that like a story?
This is when Neil Kinnock in 1985 did this big. This is the speech which the people running the Labour Party now, I would imagine, furiously masturbate over every day. Like, really, if they really.
This isn't the speech that Biden stole.
No, he did. He stole another Neil Kinnock speech about being the first of 1,000 Kinnocks to ever go to university.
Oh, that one, yeah.
Yeah. But that one, yeah, he did this. You start with impossible promises. They end up irrelevant to the real needs, turns to dogma, and you end up with a grotesque chaos of a Labour council. A Labour council swirling around taxis, giving out redundancy notices to his own workers. Yeah, I mean, that was, I won't go into what he was talking about there, but in any case, militant became this big bogeyman. My parents met outside Tooting Beck Station in 1968 for a young Labour rally, a Labour students, young Labour Party Young Socialist rally, which was basically run by the militant. And but it was too cold, so they went to the pub. Romantic.
Nice.
But then my dad was called a militant full-timer, so his full-time job was working to foment revolution. And they moved to Sheffield. My dad was from Merseyside, Wallasey, and my mum London. And they moved to Sheffield in the early 70s. And my dad was the South Yorkshire organiser, militant, and he was an alternate member of the Central Committee. So then I was born, me and sister were born during the miners' strike, which is obviously a big deal in South Yorkshire. I was born. But the revolution didn't pay the bills. So after the miners were defeated, it was twofold. They didn't have any money because they had 4 kids. They didn't expect they were going to have twins.
Yeah.
And they were skint, obviously, at the time. It was just my mum supporting 4, family. That's ridiculous, 6 people. But the miners' strike for them was really, for like a lot of the left at the time, just shattering.
Ooh.
So when I grew up, they weren't, because I think some people must have been like brainwashed and all the rest of it, but they'd really felt, if I rebelled against anything as against, not to disrespect them, because I think my dad's dead now, so he can whinge all he wants. Long dead. But my mum's still alive. But yeah, which is, I felt they seemed so defeatist all about it. But so I was always surrounded with Marxist literature, including the collected works of Lenin, which they took from, they visited the Soviet Union in the 70s.
Oh, wow, they were that deep in.
Obviously spies. Well, they were Trotskyists, so they weren't, they saw that as a Stalinist deformed state. Yeah, so I'm more right-wing than my parents. I'm not a Trotskyist.
You're not. What do you call yourself? Socialist.
Yeah, a socialist. Yeah.
So were you like a politics nerd when you were a kid?
Yeah, I think
memorizing Neil Kinnock's speeches.
I did not memorize Neil. Well, I didn't. I mean, he was the enemy as far as my parents were concerned, obviously. But I didn't. I just remember that speech because it's such a. I think I sort of saw it in my almost. Even though I was 1 year, I was 6 when Thatcher was thrown out of office. But no, it's just, I mean, Thatcher always just loomed large because she was seen, I saw her very much as I was born in this world where she'd shattered the things that I instinctively believed in, I guess. And it was kind of like, for me, politics was about overturning the Thatcherite settlement. Like, she created a settlement consensus, and you had to fight to get rid of it. But it was weird because in the late 90s, but I had to keep quiet about it because, you didn't, I went to comps in Stockport, and you didn't talk about that kind of stuff because people think you're weird, and young people weren't political at the time. There's no
Yeah.
sense of politics at all. But
That's kind of, yeah, because then by the time I got to high school, I would say that it got a little bit more fashionable to be like a lefty.
yeah, there's none of that. No one even
But so you went to Oxford, right?
Yeah.
From a comp.
yeah,
Was that a culture shock?
massive, because I went to Ridgedownia sixth form college, which is the biggest sixth form. It's called Cheadle Marple now,
Okay.
but which was a slightly odd sixth form because it was partly quite vocational. They had like they're called Football for Lifers. People want to be professional footballers, but they do football
Okay.
and then do like subjects around that, health and social care.
Wait, so you play football?
Obviously, not.
Is this when you were straight? When you were
Yeah, I
heterosexual?
did this. I was
When you were
extremely,
homophobic?
extremely mask for masculine sound.
We all go through that.
But in my friend's class, the oldest person was called Beryl. She was 80. It was ridiculous. It was a funny college.
Wait, say that again.
The oldest student in my French class was Beryl because they tried to get. It was like it was like a big sixth form, but they tried. It was like they had vocational courses,
Yeah.
older learners. As well.
Okay.
But when they went to Oxford, they almost kind of got us to, because there was thousands of students, but they got us to apply almost as a bit of a laugh.
Yeah.
And I remember they did fancy doing a mock interview, which was not helpful because their mock interview was like, "Why are you applying for Oxford then? What are your hobbies?" And then as soon as I turned up, the first question was something like, "Lenin was a German spy, wasn't he?"
Well,
You know
really?
what I mean, it was just like ridiculous. Apparently, I argued my way in because I was just.
So you used to go an arguer, you're a fighter.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, my family definitely had all that. So I think, yeah. I mean, yeah. When I went, I mean, I'm no working class hero. You know, my dad was a local authority worker. He worked for Sheffield City Council.
But like normal, I mean, like you're
And there was
stepping into
IT
that different world, right?
It's complete. I never met anyone from a grammar school or let alone a primary
Yeah.
school. And you guess you see those people on TV.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about Oxford, Cambridge. I thought because I got mixed up with University Challenge because of the I thought colleges were different from the university, so I didn't understand all that. But I went, and it was at first. I remember we went for interviews, and we went to the pub, and we all kind of like debrief afterwards. And one of my friends was like, we kept doing these song lyrics to sum up how we felt. And one of us was like, "In the words of Tommy York, I don't belong here." And we just thought people were so obnoxious.
Did you make friends with people from like? Is it possible, or are you like demarcated immediately?
It's funny what happened actually, because largely you ended up not consciously drifting towards people who were more like your background.
Yeah.
So I did have,
Unless you're like literally trying to like leave.
yeah, I did have places. I did, a very good friend from like Winchester College, lovely guy. But my college, who's still I'm seeing tonight, get Steph, who went to Jewish Free School, JFS. He's someone who had a big impact. He kind of looks after me.
Okay.
That's quite interesting. Is actually just in the current climate, because we did end up originally. He came from, I guess, a Labour Zionist background, and we'd argue about Palestine and stuff. I think it's fair to say I learned a lot from him, but he's gone on a
Yeah.
on a really, I think, interesting journey. But what I mean by that is he went to, even though he went to a state, that was a kind of selective, it's
Yeah.
out. And then I met, there were other people, though, another close friend, he went to a grammar school in the north. So, because the college I went to didn't have that many comp educated people, and you'd often meet people who were technically from state schools, but they were from slightly,
Yeah.
JFS is slightly
Kind of like
it's not like a standard state school. It's not, you didn't just get people from I didn't meet many people from
your council estate.
No, and I'm not from a council estate, and it makes it even more stupid or ridiculous, because people I grew up with would have regarded, I grew up with people who really did struggle, and I didn't at all in that way. My dad lost his job for a while, and people, were a bit skint, but it was nothing like the people I grew up with. And it was that contrast that had a big impact on me, actually, because it was just two different universes. And that's when I wrote Chavs, the Demonisation of the Working Class, the first book I wrote, was because it's just going from the contrast of people seeing, like I knew somebody who wore a school uniform at the weekend because he didn't really have clothes to wear. And then you just meet people who just speak about people they never met, as they're just lazy, scrounging, and it made me just, it was, for me, I was interested in.
So it was that experience of seeing like the upper classes and how they saw lower classes that inspired Chavs.
Because for me, it made me think about, because obviously I grew up with a kind of understand, of like inequality being you know, the class system and how
Yeah.
it works. But for me, it was like, how is that rationalized? How is it kept? How is it maintained?
Mm-hmm.
That some people are just given better conditions and others aren't. And it was really, those attitudes were really interesting in a bad way. But that's what I was interested in, that contrast between what I experienced in terms of the people I grew up with and then just, I mean, they were just, I mean, some of them now are ridiculous. Some of the people that are running the country. It's so weird.
What, that you went to university?
Well, Simon Clarke, who ended up a Tory cabinet minister, and he was,
Oh God.
he, I remember that actually because we have this thing called JCR, which is Junior Common Room, but like the president of that was of our college was like the president of the student body. He
Yeah.
got elected, and he was like then like he is now. It came across like it's a bit personal, but I mean he really did come across like a
Just say it.
60-year-old at the time. You know, because I met these stories
Because it was weird.
Well, they just didn't behave like teenagers.
Yeah.
I know that's like is that? Do you know what I mean?
But then didn't they do weird stuff like behind like they like, you know, the Bullingdon Club shit? Didn't they do all that?
I never heard of Bullingdon Club until I left Oxford. Didn't even know that.
Oh really?
Didn't even know.
Was that like an eating thing? Or not?
Well,
Was that
a lot of them are eating, but it's not just eating. It's just like very posh people. But because I heard of something else. I forgot. There was some other thing I'd heard of, which I wasn't invited to, obviously. But I never heard of the Bullingdon Club at all. Didn't know that was a thing. Never even went on my radar. But you've got people who were, I would just more think rowing, like, you know, or rugby, like people just very posh and they'd get battered and just be really, really obnoxious. I remember one of them, I came back to my room, we often just like...
No, I'd get battered and be obnoxious.
No, but this is ridiculous. I came back and I was like...
I apologise.
I'd left the door, I often just left these, you know, people left the doors.
Yeah.
Came back, I was bringing back my TV, someone's helping me bring back my TV, and then someone went, Owen, do you know there's someone in your bed? And I looked, and there's this rugby guy, massive guy, and he just passed out. He passed out. And then we had to get him out, and then I realised he'd wet himself.
Oh my
Just
God.
like wet himself.
Wait, so he just randomly walked into your bed?
Randomly went in there, and he was so drunk he wet himself, and he was this big posho. And then I think when he realised in the shape, he's something like, he just said something really homophobic towards me. He's like, faggot, you know, because he's obviously humiliated, so he was clawing back his...
Were you out by then?
I only came out I don't know if I'd come out by then. Because I had a girlfriend for a year.
Oh my God.
I know.
You apologise to her.
I should... It was actually very traumatic because...
Oh no.
When we broke up I remember it was like my first big trauma. Yeah, I came out beginning of third year because I started going out with my first boyfriend.
Who I've met.
Dave, yeah. He's my housemate at the moment.
Oh, is he? Oh, that's cute though. It is cute.
But it was 20 years. It's weird, that was 20 years ago. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, that was... I did the I'm bisexual thing.
Yeah, I did that as well. I first came out and I said, I like guys.
Oh,
the first thing I said. It's like,
okay,
I think I like guys.
That's a good, that's a classic.
Yeah, because I couldn't say.
You something similar with your parents, because with my parents.
No, I never came out. My mum outed me when I was about 13, and then I never spoke about it again. Yeah, and then she told all my friends.
How she out you?
She found porn on
I was gonna say,
and she told me off, and she was like, "This is disgusting."
oh my God.
I know, but then we spoke about it later, and she said it was because of the fact it was porn, not because of the fact it was gay porn.
Fair enough.
But my 13-year-old brain didn't differentiate, and we just never spoke about it. And then she told my whole
I
family.
think it's my slightly conservative view. I do worry about the impact of porn on teenagers.
Oh yeah,
Because it reconfigures your brain.
we were just talking about it with some of the guys before. Porn was pretty bad when I was a kid because like internet was totally unregulated. I could see the most insane depraved shit, and my mom had no idea how to use a computer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now I think the thing is that porn is like everywhere.
Yeah.
Like this kind of stuff that like was salacious page-free stuff is just Instagram explore page now. Like it's everywhere and everything's sexualized. And
But I do worry a lot of straight porn is, it's like a man being quite unpleasant to a woman.
yeah, and I think like a lot of the driving thing of incels is kind of like they're learning how to interact with women through things like porn, and then it's not working in the real life, so they're getting more and more like
Well, it changes your brain chemistry though.
And it's like I think it's another thing of like an addiction stuff, like like it's just and there's a safety in kind of like I'll watch porn because like there's no rejection there's no like, and I think it's going to get worse and worse as we get into like AI and stuff like that.
What I ever said about porn, it's like, I don't understand the professionally made stuff.
You don't understand it, or you don't like.
Well, it's just like odd.
Well,
Why
yeah,
then was so not like it? Really,
I miss the days of like Sean Cody's studio, like
also is really odd.
waxed
Which is
muscular man.
crummy and not real.
Yeah,
Yeah, I never understood that.
yeah,
Never
of
did for
course.
me.
But then now we've got. I think it's kind of fashion. It's the fashion now is like amateur, like do it yourself kind of thing.
Well, yeah, it's just because it's because it's more real, isn't it?
But like, it's kind of one of those ones because on the one side, it's not like individual kind of like sex workers that are the problem, but on the other side, like it is becoming like it's damaging the way we look at sex at a really young age.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have the answers, man. But
I don't know. Yeah, that's like most. Not because because obviously I don't know, not turning into like a one of the people who rants about trans people and then porn. But I do think it's an issue, but I don't know what you do about it because like people always literally that's impossible to people always look at porn.
yeah, of course, and they're always
There's
going to
nothing
find
you can
different
do.
ways of it. But it is kind of like I do think the problem of it being so kind of everywhere is a thing, and you're kind of noticing Gen Z is getting a bit more like prudish
Oh no, they are. They have
because of it.
They have a lot less sex.
Yeah, but then it isn't half
That's
of it kind of
ungenuine.
like because it's kind of like oh I like the safety of like wanking on my own rather than like actually touching it.
Maybe because they take less drugs, they drink less alcohol, they smoke less. Obviously, which
They're
is,
fascists.
yeah. I see. You know what? I took it as read they weren't generation left, but I think it's young men that I'm starting to worry more about. And
Well,
just
yeah, young men, sure, but I did see that like the jump in right-wing vote in America was more to do with the under 30s not coming out.
No, that's definitely true in that because then people just look at the share of younger people rather than the numbers.
You wrote about young men a couple of weeks ago, didn't you?
Yeah, I am. I think I'm more. Yeah, I wrote about how like the left doesn't have like a TikTok strategy,
Yeah.
and I just think, going back to what we're talking about influencers, I do, and it's difficult with that actually because I think the tendency then would be going, what we just need is these really blokey like.
Yeah.
And I love Hassan Piker. He actually does reach, I think, a lot of people like that.
A lot of
But
us love Hassan Piker for the plot.
Is it? I mean, everyone
He's
fancies it.
entertaining.
But then you look at like Jordan Peterson. I mean, he's got a following amongst certain young men, or Ben Shapiro is like, these are like dweeby, aren't they?
Well, this is what I don't understand, right? Is that like, okay, Hassan Piker is a good example because he is quite masculine, but he's also quite like seems like a decent guy. But
Yeah.
like Ben Shapiro is kind of like the polar opposite of what you would consider. He's the polar opposite of like Joe Rogan, who you can see is like
Comes across
a guy.
Yeah, charmless.
Yeah.
Dead behind the eyes. That's how he comes.
And like he just feels like I could beat him up. Do you know what I mean? But Joe Rogan, okay, I feel like I couldn't beat up Joe Rogan.
Well, Joe Rogan's quite charming, isn't he? And I think that's true. I guess the point you make there, because we didn't answer about the left being hectoring, I think it's difficult. I mean, I think in terms of how we frame, how do you reach people and win them over to various things? Because actually, on a lot of issues, people actually do agree with us anyway. Like,
so that's what's crazy, right? There's like loads of people in America who are kind of like predisposed to be allies of the working class who supported Bernie, but are like hardcore Trump guys. So what the fuck's happened there?
What I think, if I was going to say what the strategy is, and this is not I've got to phrase this carefully. I think one of the wisest sentences about politics comes from Ronald Reagan.
Go on.
When you're explaining, you're losing.
Okay.
And the whole
we do a lot of explaining on the left, don't we?
We do. Well, it's when we're it means it's like when you're on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
A classic example of that is like, when the George Osborne introduced the benefit cap.
Yeah.
And the benefit cap, in theory, was like, well, no one should receive more benefits than the average worker, the average wage. And that didn't take into account private landlords ripping people off and how many kids people had and how their circumstances changed, how people go in and out of work and all the rest of it. I'm already explaining, aren't I?
Yeah.
Because that just said to people, just spoke to common sense. Yeah, why should someone at work earn more than someone in work?
Mm-hmm.
And, the minimum wage is a good idea, putting that on the other side. It's like, why should someone earn their poverty? Why should someone is in work? So in politics, you should try and always find dividing lines where you're forcing your opponents to wrap themselves up in knots. And
whereas people would argue that that's what they've done to us.
Well, that's what I mean. And I think what I mean is I clearly do not want us when we obviously cannot throw migrants and trans people under walls. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if that's the main conversation, if the main conversation is just about migrants and trans people, then we are going to lose.
But I mean, like, I'm not being funny, but we've literally been not us, but say the liberal centrists have been giving an inch and an inch and an inch against migrants, especially for like last 20 years, and against trans people. And now you've got certain people on the left who are basically being like, oh no, what we need to do is we need to give an inch again.
No, I know.
And you're like,
But they're drawing the exact wrong lessons. So the way I look at it is a really good example, right? Because an advert that cut through in the recent elections, the Donald Trump advert,
yeah.
which is a really good example of people drawing the wrong conclusion.
Is this the one of he's for you and yeah.
Kamala Harris.
Say it, which is
Donald Trump's for you, Kamala Harris is for they, them.
yeah.
But you look at that and people think, what does that mean? That America's just this frothing at the mouth transphobic hellhole?
Mm-hmm.
That's not actually what I'd get from that at all.
It's the Donald Trump is for you bit.
It's the idea that if you do not have a program of economic justice that lifts the majority and makes people feel that their lives are being made better and are by what you're offering, then it is easy if you then, what Democrats do is basically like platitudes about minorities. It's then easy for the right to come along and go, well, what have they done for you? Nothing. The X, Y, these minorities that you might not actually have a particularly favourable view of, but it's not actually about like you obsessively hate them. It's just like, oh, that's all they care about. Well, but me, okay, I'm just fine. I'm just happen to be some white guy with kids, but why? And what in America that really came about with the civil rights struggle and the racist backlash against it, because what the Democrats did, because they don't.
Are you talking about the 60s and 70s then?
Yeah. Because if you go back to that, because America doesn't have social democracy.
Yeah.
So what they did under Kennedy is they slashed taxes on corporations. And then the tax burden on blue-collar Americans went up. And then you had anti-poverty measures, which particularly helped African Americans, Black Americans who had suffered violent structural racism and still do. And Reagan and people, they used racist dog whistles like welfare queens to do that, which is basically like you're working hard and your taxpayers are going to these lazy, feckless black people who we're going to demonize and hate upon. And the problem is the way the Democrats went about what they did, which is instead of getting the rich to pay more money, they reduced that and they increased the tax burden on middle Americans instead of coming up with policies which would actually lift and improve working class Americans of all backgrounds and whilst dealing with structural racism at the same time. And that really caused the kind of white lash, or provoked the sort of white lash, or made white lash win lots of support, because the wages of male workers has stagnated now since the 1970s. So, and that's because of Reaganism. And actually, ironically, because he surfed the backlash against the civil rights movement to tap into people's racist resentment in order to back policies that then made their life even harder than it was, or made it not improve. So the point I make is the lesson is not let's throw minorities into a bus. It absolutely should never be that. We have to stand our ground on that. You have to stand firm. Partly, by the way, because nothing's ever enough. You give an inch, they'll ask for more. They'll never be satisfied. Well, unless you literally, what are you going to do? You're going to start competing with them on deporting all trans people or putting them in camps. Like literally, what are you going to do? No, you're not going to do that. So what you need to do is we stand unequivocally by the rights, for example, of trans people, but we focus the conversation on economic justice. Because the problem is otherwise, what people are doing is depending on people's sense of compassion for minorities they're not part of and which they largely don't know anyone from, instead of appealing to people's sense of what are you doing for me and my family and how are you going to improve the lives in which we live. And I just think unless we force them on that's the only way we can force them on the back foot. If we focus on like what the rich plutocrats in America who are just making a killing whilst ordinary Americans are struggling, and how we take on the elites in order to make life better for everybody else, they're on the defensive. They then have to defend rich people. But I just feel that's the conversation I'm missing, because the people going, no, we need to start conceding on trans rights. Like, no, that's not the right lesson. The lesson is they want that to be the main conversation. It's like as a gay person, did we want the main conversation, the 1980s, to be about gay rights? Of course we didn't.
Yeah.
They wanted the left to defend us, but obviously we can only win power as the left if we have an agenda which reaches and transforms the lives of the majority.
The thing that kind of like scares me or makes me feel a little bit pessimistic is the fact that like I feel like this whole kind of liberal identity politics happened because we gave up on kind of like class politics,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
And what I think we underestimate is how effective the rich are at propaganda. And so I'm looking recently, like Jeremy Corbyn did like a tweet that was like, billionaires shouldn't own XYZ. And then Elon Musk retweeted him being like, they so should. And then Joe Rogan screenshotted it and was like, legend, like what a legend Elon Musk is. And it's kind of like, we're in this kind of age of like authoritarianism or like kind of like looking up to these guys like they're gonna save us. You know what I mean? Like, are we prepared to fight that?
I'm a bit, the pessimist in me says, I'm afraid we've got to just have to go through like an unpleasant period.
Yeah, whether we
In that, history doesn't, people say, doesn't often repeat itself, but often rhymes. I'm not saying it's like exactly like the 30s and the 40s, but I am saying that those who supported fascism had to be faced with the terrible consequences of it in order for that to be stigmatized. And the problem is that stigma has just gone because the war and the experience of fascism is now in the distant past. Someone like Trump would not have been elected president in the 1970s in America, even though America was a mess in the 1970s. The economy was a mess. It had been defeated in a foreign war. Huge numbers of Americans had died. You had the racist backlash against the civil rights movement. You had riots across the United States. You had not only a drastic increase in actual violent crime, it was way higher than it is today. Like that sense of disorder and decline and all the rest of it was very pervasive. Where was the Trump? Well, people wouldn't have voted for him because they would have gone too much of a whiff of a Hitler, too much of a whiff of Mussolini. I just think the problem is after World War II, there was this sense of a cordon sanitaire where you have the centre right, but anything beyond that is not acceptable. It's dangerous and you don't do anything with it. You keep well away from it. That is gone. The centre right has collapsed and it's either now just the far right or it's allied to it. And you can see that's what's happened to the Republican Party. It's a far right political party now. It's not a centre right party, whatever that means, but it's not in any way, it's a far right political party. And you can see that happening, in other parties, or the far right parties are just nipping at their heels, like in Germany or in France. So I just think,
go on, what is the future? We're almost at the end, yeah. What is the future for the left? The next 5 years, what does it look like for us?
We've got to stand our ground.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, what always gives me hope is the neoliberals in the 40s, when you had the Great Depression and World War II came out of that, and everyone looked at laissez-faire economics and went, absolutely not, disaster. And they set up something called the Mont Pelerin Society.
What's that?
The Mont Pelerin Society. They met in a sleepy town called Mont Pelerin in Switzerland, and they set up think tanks and organised and all the rest of it. And obviously they had rich donors to back them up, but they waited for their moment, for a crisis, and that came in the 70s, and that's why we ended up with neoliberalism. The difference is we don't have rich people to back us, but it's not like that, because in the 1940s, their policies and ideas were monstrously unpopular and actually never actually won any enthusiasm. But actually, we do actually have public support on these issues. And I think this is an age of crisis and turmoil. Like, we've been in turmoil, the world now, basically since a decade now, in terms of when everything kind of went to pot. And obviously the turmoil's only going to increase because of things like the climate emergency.
Yeah.
And what we've got to do is stand our ground on the issues, but we've got to focus it on economic justice, which is the enemy is the elites. We actually do have great thinkers now. We've got all these, we've got all these, it's not like it was when I was a lad, as it were, because then it was just defensive, like stop privatization. The left's brimming with ideas, but what we need is to get leaders, because we need leaders.
Well, yeah, and that is the thing. Like, I look at like the MPs and I'm like not enthused by anybody. Even this like group of suspended MPs, I'm sorry, but like who is rallying?
Well, I mean, obviously, I obviously got a huge amount of time for John McDonnell, but I think,
I love John McDonnell, but like also you do feel a little bit like he's done his job.
No, I get. I do think someone like Mick Lynch, by the way,
Yeah.
is, because actually as well what the left needs is someone who can straddle what Bernie Sanders did at his peak.
Yeah.
Is straddle two groups of people, the sort of Joe Rogan type people,
Yeah.
people susceptible to Trump. And I'm going to say it again. Someone with blue hair and who's 22 years old, lives in
You're gonna say it.
who lives in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But he straddled that, didn't he? He straddled the sorts of people who are young progressives who care deeply about things like trans rights, LGBTQ rights, anti-racism, climate. And he also, but also a lot of those are young people in precarious jobs and work who care about economic justice. And also older, quite socially conservative people. And I think someone like Mick Lynch, you can imagine that allied to someone, imagine, Mick Lynch and Faiza Shaheen, who was the Labour candidate until she was purged, very relatable, charismatic, woman of colour, economist, very accomplished economist. You've got the people, I think, in terms of the Greens, I think they should make Zach Polanski leader rather than, no offence to the MPs at the moment, but they're not cutting through. So he understands dividing lines, because in the age of rage, you need a dividing line. And the dividing line at the moment is migrants versus, be angry at migrants and refugees. And we've got to shift that anger at the right targets. But yeah, I think what we need to do is don't start crumbling because of this. If people think you just start conceding, if you concede the argument, you're not going to win people over. You're just going to look pathetic. You're going to look like you're defensive, and you're just going to make people think, well, that just shows we've won the argument, and make them even more emboldened. We just instead got to refocus the argument. And that's why, why are people looking at the Democrats losing and making it out like that's a defeat for the left?
Yeah, no.
We're not Kamala Harris. She ran a corporate campaign, and you get the worst kind of consequence with that, because you get Kamala Harris, who's basically done the check box on on minority rights, whilst offering no economic justice. So then she's easily portrayed as, well, she only cares about these people, but she doesn't care about you.
It was funny though, because Kamala Harris did run a campaign that was corporate, and she didn't run an identity politics campaign, but the journalists kind of did. They were like, are you ready to vote for a woman? Are you ready to vote for a black woman? Like, that was pretty much the conversation running up to
Do
it.
you think, I didn't really see that very much, because she didn't do what she...
It wasn't her, it was journalism around her.
Well, because there was definitely, she didn't do the Hillary Clinton thing with
No, she didn't.
Hillary Clinton, her campaign was just like, how about giving me a promotion? Give me my promotion. I want my promotion. I deserve this. Give it to me. I deserve it. She didn't do that, but I think it's interesting. A lot of the centrist commentators who, if you look at what they said during the campaign, they're like, this is perfect. This is
Yeah.
And now they're like, too left wing. She's a radical Marxism. It's like, what the fuck?
I know, it's kind of fucking crazy.
But I just think...
What's funny, actually, is that she actually ran the exact same campaign that Keir Starmer ran. The difference is that the Republicans didn't collapse. They had Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If Boris Johnson was around, chance we have a Boris Johnson government. Right?
Well, also, they weren't... the point is, there's always been incumbents.
Yeah.
And you got... Because actually, it's the one thing that you could, concede is you got the biggest defeat of incumbent governments ever, and that a lot of that's to do with inflation, and that happened under them. Obviously, they could have done stuff to make people's lives better, but then again, I
honestly think though that Trump, a lot of the fuel behind Trump is the broken minds of COVID. Like the Joe Rogan sphere is like, though COVID snapped them up.
That's definitely true. Yeah, I think you're right on that. But then again, let's be honest, I think people looked at 2016 when he won as basically a glitch in the matrix, like it was an accident.
Yeah.
But now it's clearly an epochal shift. And you can see, the fact is, that's the political force that's on the rise.
So are we going to see a Owen Jones MP?
I honestly prefer to set my face on fire. No.
Never.
2 reasons. Don't want it. And also, I'd be rubbish at it. I'm not the person to do that. No, we need to build up people who... I think Mick Lynch is a good example. I think Faiza Shaheen's a good example.
Fair enough. Okay.
What about you?
What
are you doing?
Absolutely not. I don't want people going through my my life. Do you know what I mean?
Good point.
Even just watching Zach, like the fact that he was having to answer about the hypnotism thing. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, oh my god. But it's not like I've got honestly, I honestly don't.
Well, I'm an innocent princess, so I see worried about
you. Don't understand.
My clean living would protect me from that.
You're clean living. You got no skeletons in your closet. Okay, we're gonna play a quick game to end. We're just gonna find out who your favorite prime minister is. Yeah, and we're gonna do it by I'm just gonna go, who do you prefer? It's I got it from TikTok. It's like a game. Okay, Margaret Thatcher or Boris Johnson?
Boris Johnson, if I had to choose between those two, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's Boris Johnson or Macmillan?
Macmillan, obviously.
Macmillan or Truss?
Macmillan.
Truss or Attlee?
Attlee.
Attlee or Blair?
Attlee.
Attlee or Brown?
Attlee.
I knew I should have put Attlee later on. Attlee or Wilson?
Attlee.
Attlee or David Cameron?
Oh yeah, David Cameron. Attlee.
Attlee or Theresa May?
Attlee.
The best Prime Minister of the last 15 years, by the way. Shout out Theresa.
The worst one is definitely David Cameron. And people who
worst.
go the worst one's Boris Johnson always get this.
Or Liz Truss.
No, because she was only there for like she was too short lived to like whatever.
Either way.
David Cameron wrecked the country and paved the way for everything that happened.
Yeah. Oh my God, actually, I remember I met George Osborne once, and I was quite young, and I was in a pub and I was talking to him, and then I called my mum and I was like, Mum, I'm at a pub with George Osborne, and she was like, tell him that he stop my fucking rents up, because he was in social housing and all of that. And then she was like, no, don't do it. He might get worse. Yeah.
Should have headbutted him.
But he was actually,
don't arrest me.
He was actually really polite to me, and all the like spads around him were like horrible. Like, who the fuck are you?
Interesting, because I've actually never met him. The one person who is charming and people wouldn't imagine is Michael Gove.
Oh, he really creeps me out, but I can imagine he's charming.
When I tried, I tried, during Conservative conference, and I was like trying to are you going to support cutting universal credit or whatever it's on? He was like, Owen, are you from Stockport? Because we're in Manchester, just nearby. So this is, I suppose, home.
So how to bamboozle you?
So I said, yeah, a lot of people I grew up with in Stockport are going to be hammered by these cuts. So anyway, but he kept trying to throw me, and he's obviously quite. He's more charming than you would definitely think, but I think that's quite a low bar.
I've given up on my game, Do you want to see the others that I was going to say?
Yeah, why did you do Attlee? It was a total
Attlee or Brown?
Attlee.
Attlee or Wilson? Oh no, we've done that. Attlee or Starmer?
Obviously, Keir Starmer's my favourite Prime Minister. I named my cat after
relationship with Keir Starmer?
I don't have a relationship with him. He did used to.
You used to do?
No, he just.
You just knew him. You just knew him.
I knew him because someone who was a close friend of mine was his chief of staff, who he fell out with over the Labour Party and the fact he kept feeding me things which weren't true in order to destroy everything I believe.
Oh, really? What your mate was trying to like.
For me, I don't have that many red lines in. I'm not like, but like I do think someone feeding you things which are not true in order to destroy everything you've ever believed in is definitely a red line to cross, isn't it?
What kind of things that were not true? What do you mean? Like in terms
well, this was Chris Ward, who is now a Labour MP, having been parachuted into the seat which was held by Lloyd Russell Moyle. He was a gay MP who was very conveniently, just before the general election, blocked from standing because of an accusation which then later was found to be nonsense.
Yeah, but
it was dropped. But it's too late after the election. And he was Chris Ward. I know always wanted that seat. He always coveted that seat. He grew up in Brighton. He has no campaigning connection to it, but and the local members would never have voted for him. But I just Anyway, so I knew Keir Starmer through. I mean, I don't know him. I've interviewed him.
Yeah. What's he like in person? He seems really dry, honestly.
Dry. I mean, he did when he became leader. He'd occasionally. I'll say his seat because I'll say this because he's just he lied to me as well.
Mm.
In that he would message because he's thin-skinned. He'd message me the first few months after he became leader when I criticised him, being all like,
"Already,
yeah." He'd message me like I was like, "You're not my dad." One of them he was like, "You're better than this." I was like, "What the fuck is this?" But he said the reason. This is it was after like Jeremy being suspended from the Labour Party and stuff. And I said, well, I think the people around you are determined to crush the left, and that's what this is all about. And he said, I'm not interested at all in crushing the left. Like,
this is your mate who said this?
No, this is Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer. Oh.
He said to me, I'm not interested. He said that, it's just about anti-Semitism, which is not a left or right issue. But clearly, so then a few months later.
Do you think he's in control?
No, he is. He doesn't really have any politics, and other than that, he wanted to be prime minister for the hell of it.
Do you think they'll get rid of him?
Oh yeah, God yeah. Well, he's duck. Look at him; he's falling apart. They'll try and get rid of him. What I'm desperate for them to do is replace him with Wes Streeting. My view is just go wild now. Like they need to fail disastrously on their own terms, because the fact is, Keir Starmer's done everything they wanted. He's smashed the left into tiny pieces. He's adopted a load of reactionary, awful policies. It goes on about immigration and law and order all the time. What more do you want the guy to do? He's done all that. and it's fallen apart. So now they're going to go, oh, he's not a true believer. Let's get Wes Streeting in because he's a real true believer. Put him in. Go on, put him in. Put Wes Streeting in as leader of the Labour Party. Let's see how it goes. Do you know what's going to happen? A total disaster. So I want Wes Streeting to become leader of the Labour Party. Never thought I'd say it. I'm desperate for him to become Prime Minister. And I'm desperate to see what the consequences of Wes Streeting being Prime Minister are for him and for the Labour Party. Let it burn. Let it all burn.
I think I've got quite a good, like, I don't know, measure for like whether someone's got it or not. Yeah, because you know when people are hyped up in the media, like Sunak was, I was like, don't see it with Starmer, don't see it with Kemi. I don't think she's got it. I think it's quite embarrassing, actually. I'm quite sad for her.
All of it, isn't it? It's really interesting. If you look in the 70s, you might disagree with the politicians, but they were quite substantial people.
Yeah.
He's all right.
It's quite embarrassing. That picture of her in her like boots and that, it was just really embarrassing. It was like she was on a school trip.
I don't know what strategy is.
But yeah, I don't think Wes Streeting has it. You know, like he's one of those ones where Peter Mandelson is like, oh, he's fantastic.
Yeah, they all love it. The commentariat love it, and him, and all the people who thought Keir Starmer would be a tremendous success now will think he'll be a tremendous success. Let's see how it goes. I think that.
But who though? Who would, like, say if you wanted like a good Labour Party to like do the things that you want to do? Who would you choose?
Well, obviously, I'd choose John McDonnell.
Yeah,
he's I think the best leader Labour never had.
You worked for him, right?
But I did work for him.
I've heard you say that before. Why'd you say that? Is that you trying to make it his tagline?
Yeah, I think because he's someone who's just like a thinker. You know, he's this from the tradition of working class autodidactism. Autodidacticism. I can't say it.
What does that mean?
He's like kind of self-taught. You know, he taught himself through high school, and he's like this real working class intellectual who's a thinker and has a vision for society and how it should look like.
Why does George Galloway hate him so much? What, they got beat on it?
George Galloway is not left wing at all. He's a reactionary who's got toxic political opinions on a whole range of issues, including trans rights, I would say, but also on migrants and whatever. He, or if I was going to do a compromise right now, I'd settle for like Andy Burnham.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Andy Burnham.
Angela?
No, I mean, Angela. She's just taking the piss. The reason I got really angry with her is she got around the corner from me, literally. I'm not even joking. When I say around the corner, I mean around the corner. This Palestinian guy called Dalil Ahmed was at a fundraiser for her in Stockport, and he was part of a protest where he stood up with the picture of his dead mother who killed by the Israeli military under rubble, and he just got thrown out like a piece of dirt by security as she stood there. And ever since then, relative after relative, loved one after loved one has been murdered, like most of his family, all the rest of it. I just thought you people are just bad people. I don't like them. I think they're soulless. I don't think they care about anything other than themselves. I think they're self-advancing careerists who got no political soul or heart, who don't care about injustice in any meaningful way. And I think they deserve political destruction. But the question is what comes next, and I don't want that to be Farageism. Anyway.
Nigel Farage. Yeah. I've been working on my Nigel Farage impression.
Go on, do it.
Okay, let's see. Britain is full up. There's too many people.
Excellent.
Get rid of them.
I thought Nigel was here.
Oh God, Owen, it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
What's your next book going to be?
It's called The Fall of the West.
The Fall of the West.
I'll go and write it.
Are you writing it?
Yeah, I'm writing it.
How far are you in?
Not far enough. I'm supposed to finish it by July. I'm getting there.
Okay.
I've been interviewing lots of interesting people, like the grandson of an Afghan warlord.
Nice.
Some call the butcher of Kabul. He calls grandpa.
Okay. Fun. How did you meet him? Oxford?
No. I first interviewed him when the Taliban swept back into Kabul. He was in Kabul.
Terrorist sympathizer.
Yeah, well, clearly at some point I presume I'm just going to get arrested. Right? I'm not a terrorist sympathizer, but he's a brilliant commentator. He's a really fascinating commentator. No, I'm interviewing lots of interesting people, but
good. Well, I look forward to it.
And thanks for coming. Thank you for inviting me to this brilliant podcast.
No, thank you for coming, and it's been great.
I'm proud of you.
And got lots of love for you, and thanks so much.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye.